Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 21, Invisible Disabilities, with our guest, Dany Atkins, on location at her home in Hayward, California. Hi, Dany. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
I'm glad to be here.
So, for the people who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Dany or Dawn or DM Atkins, depending on what role you put me in. I'm an author and an activist, and I've written on a lot of topics, including body image and disability issues.
One of the issues we were talking about before we started the interview was invisible disability. And a lot of people, it's still now an issue where people still won't believe people when they say, oh, I have X disease, I have X disability, and yet...
Well, they'll believe sometimes, but they won't understand. So, for instance, I was actually born disabled, so I've had severe asthma most of my life. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the thing I will most likely die of, oddly enough. Mm-hmm. And because it's such a common illness, and because there is some treatments for it now, people often sort of dismiss your needs. Like, of course, you know, so you have asthma, no big deal. Or they treat it like you're being a hypochondriac. So I've had people, when I ask them to stop smoking next to me, blow smoke into my face because of it. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about earlier, I'm also allergic to several leaf plants, including marijuana and sage. Mm-hmm. And of course, sage creates this whole other thing because it's considered natural, so it shouldn't hurt me. And if I'm hurt by it, I had actually somebody suggest that it was my energy and I shouldn't be in the ritual if I couldn't handle sage.
Oh,
that was the universe telling me that there was something wrong with me spiritually because I'm allergic to sage. I mean, I've had mixed success with it. I've had people with that reaction, and then I've also had other people who learned and found other ways to, you know, purify a circle or purify a house. We use salt water and often dipping sage into it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, our coven has done the same thing, you know, and, you know, we've done a lot of different kinds of stuff like that, you know, for people in recovery, and like we have ramps in our house so people can actually get into the house for our rituals. And
as I age, I get more and more disabled in different ways. Like I have fibromyalgia, I have PTSD, I have dyslexia. There's all these weird things, you know. And I once wrote in one of the journals on disability, praxis piece on disability and queer issues and how they intersect. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that. I said, you know, one of the funny things about it is there seems to be a strike 3 rule. You can have one thing of which you're allowed to be different on, or one disability. Or 2, they start to go, you're in trouble.
Right.
But the minute you get to 3, it's like everything's suddenly dismissed, that you've made it all up. Mm-hmm. So being, for instance, bi, pagan, dyslexic, disabled, it's too much. So therefore, they no longer want to help you.
Yeah, the brain just kind of goes, wait, no, you must be... It must be somehow your fault, or, you know, you're just being a whiny brat about it, or things like that. Yeah.
I mean, so like, for instance, a high pain disorder like fibromyalgia affects things that other people kind of have to allow for, I guess. So the pagan standard time joke about a ritual starting late. Right. I can, you know, maybe wait a half an hour for the ritual to start. But if it's, I've been to rituals that were 2 or 3 hours late starting, when I can only sit up unaided for 2 hours max anyway, by the time the ritual's starting, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And these are the kind of things that the planners often leave out, that, you know, that being on time isn't just polite. Right. It's also accommodating for people with disabilities, so they can time how much energy they can put to the effort. So I don't go to public ritual anymore. I get too overwhelmed with dealing with people not accommodating all the different issues.
Well, I think a lot of priests don't really think about it because they're so wrapped up in honoring whatever spirits or this, that, and the other, or getting the ritual prepared, that, you know, it's not, and it's not happening to them, so they have blinders on.
Yeah. And they often, I don't mind people not knowing in advance usually. What I mind is when people are unable to take it in and think about what is more important, the tool or the person you're serving. I mean, I considered myself when I was doing priest work to be serving my community. And so if I had blocks to something where I couldn't serve them because of their disability stuff, then I had to think about what's more important, the tools that they're uncomfortable with or their needs. And I'm going to give you, I'll bring up the Starhawk example, which is a great example of somebody not getting it and then getting it. So years ago, my coven at the time and I drove all the way up from Santa Cruz to somewhere in the North Bay, I think somewhere Napa area, for a solstice ritual in a big building with lots of people. And the organizers, Starhawk was the lead for it, were smudging everybody, not just as you came in the door, but they literally had the smudge that go around this huge circle. Even a small whiff of sage will start me sniffling and coughing. And by the time this thing had literally filled the ceiling with smoke from going all the way around, I was in respiratory distress. By the time the ritual was over, I had to be taken to the ER. It took me weeks to recover because it basically gave me instant pneumonia. So I went and did some research on sage because I'd actually knew there was something that was making me cough, but not what before all this went down. And I found that sage, of course, all the warnings, if you actually read up on sage, say never use it around anybody with any respiratory illness like asthma. You also shouldn't use it around pregnant women because it's abortifacient, or women who are lactating because it can dry up the milk. So it's been used deliberately to dry up somebody's milk in a ritual and things like that. So I wrote this up as an article, and it was actually published in Sage Woman, which they found ironic, and so did I. Funny. And the nice thing about that is Starhawk, after she was told about this, because I sent it to her, went and changed her policies. She also looked up on the issues of using Native American tools in a pagan ritual without understanding the complex dynamics there. So she never used smudging again in that sense in any kind of public ritual. So she did learn from it. And I'm hoping other people will think about, is this tool something, not just, if you're doing a private ritual, you use your limits. But if you're doing a public ritual, you have to think about what other issues will come up for people. So you don't want smoke. You don't want heavy scents. I don't use incense in public rituals at all. And, is there a place for the person to sit who can't stand? Is there a place, if you're doing a spiral dance, isn't just whether or not a person can walk, it's whether or not their joints can handle being pulled. I have a joint condition, which means it hurt a lot. So, and where can the person sit? And, one of the ways for that has been to put the people in the middle. That actually doesn't work for me because I get overwhelmed by the energy swirling around me. So I'd rather be at the edge if that happens. So giving people options and not saying you have to do this if you're disabled and can't do it. Say sit where you feel comfortable, that won't get trampled on.
Well, that makes sense to me. Being just, my own back issues, I'm understanding this a whole lot more because I can't stand for long periods of time and I can't really walk for long periods of time on really hard surfaces, like concrete floors and that kind of thing. So going to something like spiral dance would be a no-go unless I could sit on the edge as well. And just for my own mental health of being an introvert, being around a lot of people like that, after a while, I need to go sit in the corner.
There has to be a place you can go when you don't want to be the center of the energy. And I was very extroverted at the time I was involved with reclaiming and spiral dance. It was actually before reclaiming was a big group. And I loved the huge ritual and being part of that. It's not something that really appeals to me today because I do have problems with crowds and with PTSD issues. Loud noises are often a problem. But I still want to be included in the community, even if I can't do public ritual like that. And I don't think that we're often set up for that. The entryway into our community often is the large public ritual. And I haven't seen very much of what we also used to do, which is small social gatherings that were open to people you didn't already know. And so the only way to get involved now is if you know somebody who knows somebody.
Right.
And unlike a church where you can walk in from in the door, we don't often have that accessibility to newcomers.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And do you think body image is also an issue around this? Because, you know, if you have a disability, you're very aware of your body. And then there's also the larger body issues of super skinny, super fat.
And people's assumptions about weight. I mean, weight and health. I mean, this comes back to, I think I've mentioned before, Robert Crawford's idea of healthism. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's been adopted pretty much wholesale by New Age and pagan communities much of the time, which is this idea that your health shows how healthy your spiritual energy is. So if you're disabled, it means there's something wrong with you spiritually. Mm-hmm. And that is toxic. I mean, it's a toxic religious view. It's a blame the victim. You know, if you were injured, it was because you were something wrong with you rather than maybe somebody should have had a railing on that staircase, which is how I shattered my leg, right? So this fear of illness and aging in many ways, because, you know, one of the things I've noticed is that as I've reached a certain age, over 50 now, is it's like I really did pass a barrier to which I'm no longer welcome at some social gatherings. I recently wrote about this being uninvited because I didn't have the right look. And we were trying to narrow down whether it was age or disability, because the other person who was invited was also a fat woman, so probably not weight. So we were trying, is it because I walk with a cane? Or a leg brace? Is it because I've got some gray in my hair? I don't know.
Well, and that seems to be something in that kind of thing is also, to me, pretty still a thing in the pagan community too, because, you know, a lot of the more popular groups, more popular people have a lot of very conventionally attractive, high energy, zooming around the room kind of people.
Well, and the irony is that even when I was one of those people, when I was young and healthy and very activist, I was disabled. It's just people couldn't see it.
Right.
But I also, you know, because of my body image work, I worked at a group called the Body Image Task Force. Actually, I was the founder of it for years. I was more aware of people's limits. So when I showed up at Ancient Ways Festival for the first time and did work trade, and they said, what do you want to do for work trade? And I said, I have a car and you have no way for people who are disabled to get over to the pools. So I'm going to do a shuttle. And they said, what? Because they expected me to sign up for something already there. But I saw a place where something wasn't being done that should be done. I said, how do people who are older or disabled or have small kids hike that trail to get to the pools? Because it's quite a hike for somebody who's not stable on their feet or has to deal with small babies. Right. So I set up, and for years that it became a tradition. Even when I left and couldn't attend Ancient Ways Festival, the disability shuttle had become part of the structure of the festival. That's cool. And, you know, when my mom finally did get to go, she was grateful for it because it meant she could participate. But I had a mom who taught me these things because I have a radical feminist mother, Mary E. Atkins, and she would do things remind us that we needed to walk the march ahead of time to see what barriers there would be along the way, rather than just look at a map. Actually walk a march or take somebody in a wheelchair with you on the route, so that you know that if there's potholes or if there's traffic problems or you know, anything that's going to cause a problem for people marching.
Well, to me, I guess now that I'm kind of in the practice of really making sure that, okay, you know, is it safe space? Is it accessible space? You know, what do we have in the ritual that could be possibly harmful? And what can we take out and what could we substitute? You know, I'm been so much in the habit of that. It just seems so like second nature to me. So it's really weird when I go to somebody else's ritual and, you know, there's no way for somebody in a wheelchair or with a cane to participate in the ritual. Yeah. Or, you know, if somebody had even whatever disability, you know, there's no thought. And
you often find yourself surprising the person and they're unhappy and uncomfortable with it. And I know that it's really hard if you've got this one set ritual in your head or set way of the evening is going to go, and then somebody shows up who obviously is not going to be able to go with the plan.
Right.
And some people just aren't very good at adapting quickly, but they could do so. You can do so without hate, acrimonious attitudes towards the person. I can see it in people's face when I walk in the door. They see me limping, they see the cane, they see me stooped if I'm having a bad pain time period. And there's a kind of deflate. Oh my God, she's going to be trouble.
Yeah.
And so, and this is even for social events. So it's, or the fact that, I can't eat some foods because they make me sick.
Right.
There's another thing. Oh my God, she can't be around smoke. She can't be this. She can't be that. Oh, I just won't invite her because she'll be too much trouble.
Yeah. And
very isolating.
Yeah. And I think, because it's in the Christian community too. It's definitely so, and I've seen it myself. But it just kind of boggles, like I said, I'm so practiced at it now, and that I'm always thinking about it, that it boggles my mind when people don't. And it's, and also when people think it's just somebody being whiny about something.
Yeah. If you speak up, you're being whiny. If you don't speak up, you're like, well, why didn't you? They're like, why didn't you tell me? Like it's your fault for not telling them when they really should have thought of some of these things ahead of time. Ideally, if we're teaching people how to do ritual properly, I don't know who's teaching what these days, you're teaching them to think about who's going to be there and ways to include everybody in the ritual. Even if there's set people leading a ritual, the energy, the participation has to be there. So if you have a place where it's like everybody must stand now, what do you do with the person who can't stand or can only stand for a few moments? So you have to wait. You have to say something like, if you're comfortable, could you please stand now? If you're comfortable doing so, and just always make it immediately obvious that instead of like an afterthought that not everybody has to do so.
Yeah, and I know in church we usually say, if you're willing and able, please stand.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Or like sometimes Bishop would be like, oh, don't worry, you don't have to stand if you don't, if you don't feel like it.
I don't like being called out. I'm not so bad with it, but I think it's easier if they say it as a normal part of the ritual. If you're comfortable and willing and you stand now, instead of saying everybody stand now. Oh, except you.
Right.
Because then it feels like you feel like an afterthought. It's still better not giving you permission at all, but it'd be nice if people thought of this stuff ahead of time. And I'm really surprised that people ever burn things in public rituals. We've worked so hard in California to have no smoking bans. And what do they think? Tobacco is the only burning thing that's going to be a problem. All these herbs have power, right? You say they have power. If you burn them, you're releasing not just energy, but actual particulates into the air. Do your research, find out what those particulates are going to do.
Right.
It's kind of funny that they'll know their medicinal purposes, but they won't know their side effects, essentially.
Right. Or at least, find some other way to use them or use something different.
Yeah.
I had to, when I was doing my Christian worship class, we were talking about the Eucharist. And one of the things that I did is I was sitting there thinking, because we had talked a lot about in our class about people with eating disorders and how the Eucharist could be traumatic for them. And I was like, so what do you do for that? And what I came up with was that we would have a Eucharist, but I would make an anointing oil at the same time. And that way it's all blessed. It's all blessed in the Eucharistic style, but you don't have to eat if you don't want it.
Well, in our non-public rituals, we use mead that we make and alcohol. So, but we know that there are various reasons why somebody would not want to drink alcohol. So when we pass the horn, we'll say, before we pass it, we'll say, if you feel comfortable drinking it, this is what it is. If you don't, please just hold it up to the air, to the gods or whatever, to be blessed, and pass on. That you don't actually have to drink it or eat the food if we send it around. And nobody seems to have any problem with that, which is, there might be somebody, but it's comfortable that they know they're not expected to. But they're still blessed just by holding the horn.
Well, I found that if we're really upfront about why we don't do certain practices, there's people that are like, what do you mean you don't do that? And then there's people like, oh, thank you. So, people are really relieved when they come to our suite at Pecan and they're like, oh, thank you for having this safe space where, we don't have to worry about, that there's drugs or alcohol and it's usually kind of a chill. We usually make it a nice chill space for people to come and relax. And it's interesting to see the reactions to people when they come in and come out. Cause, some people looking for a party, they just look around they look around and see nothing going on and they bug off. But then there are some people that really don't have anywhere else to go that will come because they know they can be safe there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's been hard for me is not being able to go to events, especially things like Pecan, because I can't go to the room parties when I'm in a wheelchair.
Right.
Because really, it's just too crowded. There's no way to get in. Sometimes people have made room for me. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times I'm, especially with the electric wheelchair, it's really hard you can't collapse it up like you can a manual and stuff. One of the things that happens with people is getting isolated. We were talking about this, which is if you can't go to the social events, how do you stay part of a community? If things are held in houses that are not accommodating, and that's not, in the Bay Area, it's very hard to find a disability accommodating house in the first place.
Right.
One of the things when we do host something, we'll put on there that we do have a ramp, a portable ramp we can set up whenever somebody needs it, that we have special hinges on our bathroom door so somebody in a wheelchair can still get through the door.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know if you know those exist.
Oh, yeah, I saw the hinges. I was like, why are those different?
We took off the hinges that came with the house, put those on, and we stored, since it's a rental, we stored the old hinges. We'll trade it back when we leave. Mm-hmm. But this way we had, some way that anybody coming into our house could use the bathroom, which is kind of important. And there are lots of ways you can make things more accessible to other people, especially, like I said, so much of the pagan community is either a convention or it's in somebody's house.
Right.
So, cleaning up as much as possible before people get there so they don't have to deal with dust and things like that. Or we label everything in our kitchen so that people feel comfortable. They can go get themselves a glass of water or whatever they need. Mm-hmm.
That's what we did, for our hand fasting, because we wanted everybody to be able to come, and we had quite a few people that we knew that had trouble with steps, and and we had these weird drops and things to get into the backyard, and so Sarah went into the garage and made a bunch of ramps, and we actually left them there.
You can make them. If you can't make them, you can actually, literally, I have a suitcase ramp. Mm-hmm. It folds up and has its own little case with a handle.
Oh, cool.
And it's for 1 or 2 steps. Mm-hmm. And getting into most houses, you could use it.
Oh, very cool.
And that's what I have that I can take with my wheelchair if I need it. I originally bought it for my mother when she was in a wheelchair, and then I inherited all her stuff when she died. So I have all this disability equipment that I didn't need then, but I need now. Mm-hmm. But I, as a person hosting, I had a lot of those things already anyway. Mm-hmm. I take hosting as a sacred obligation when you invite people into your home, especially for an event like a ritual or something that's connected to spiritual practice, that you make it as accessible as you can and as welcoming a space as you can.
Right. I mean, we try to do that too. It seems neglectful and non-compassionate to really think about that. I know I'm kind of a broken record about, clergy not really thinking about it, but, people really just don't. And it seems there's a lot more awareness of disability, of all of that, PTSD and everything like that. There just seems to be a lot more awareness now that it just seems to be, like I said, it's strange to me that people just haven't thought about it.
I know that it's hard for people who haven't been there to think about these issues. Mm-hmm. But one of the things to remember, if they can't already know ahead of time, if they try to think about things ahead of time, but if you can't, be willing to learn about it when people bring it to your attention.
Right.
And I think that's been the harder one. People often get defensive and angry and take it out on the person asking for admission to that space in some way to be there. And, you know, there are always limits to what one can do, but there's a regular gathering of friends that I would like to go to, but she literally told me, well, except you wouldn't be able to go because there's too many stairs. And there was no real apology involved. There was just like, no, let's see if we can find a way to get you in. It was just, it would be not worth the effort.
And it would, I guess maybe some of the strangeness to me too is like, why would you not want somebody to come? Just because you can't figure out a way to accommodate them, or if they...
Well, sometimes it might be literally a click disability. There are people who don't like being around people disabled.
Sure.
I don't know if it's because it reminds them of their own mortality or their own fragility, or if it's, you know, I don't know. There's lots of, you know, this idea that they're not, that somehow they deserved it, that they're wrong for having it. I think it's more often the first, that they're just not aware of what's involved.
Right.
And not being aware often leaves people feeling vulnerable, and so they react negatively toward people who try to talk to them about it. And that's something people can work through. It's something they can do.
Right.
But yeah, there's definite looksism involved. Of they don't look right. I don't want to be around somebody who's not my ideal of what a pagan or person should look like.
Do you think clergy should be more aware and more responsible in that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on what do you see your goal as? Is your goal to be there for the community? And the thing about disability and these kind of body images is, if you're completely able-bodied, it's a temporary thing. I mean, seriously, I would look at people when I did my body image workshops, and I say, how many of you have ever had the flu and down for 2 days? Most everybody. How many, name several common things like that. And it was, now imagine it never going away. Now imagine, that sprained ankle never healed.
Right.
This is everybody. Eventually, your body is going to find something that it can't recover from. I mean, that's this. If you are going to age, you are going to get disabled.
Yep.
And coming to terms with that will help you be a better clergy, will help you be a better person if you recognize that that's an experience that most people will go through. Some of us just have it sooner than others.
Right.
But even if you start out with a completely able-bodied group, if you stay together long enough, somebody's going to get injured, somebody's going to get ill. And one of the things that I've actually, growing up at least, felt that the Christian church that I grew up in did better was taking care of the sick, taking care of the elderly, taking care of people who couldn't come to church or couldn't do things like that. And the minister would actually go out and visit them socially, not just, do you need food, but, sit down and talk.
Right.
Because a lot of people who get disabled end up, sort of homebound and alone. It's better with the internet. At least we can talk to people.
Right.
Or people like me who, I'm lucky to have a cooperative household. But I hear this a lot from people who have fibromyalgia. They end up being socially isolated because they didn't attend the last 3 times you invited them, so people quit inviting them.
Right.
And then they never get to go anywhere anymore.
Well, yeah, and it's a matter of thinking about it and saying, oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't see my friend because I know they have XYZ going on. And maybe I should go visit them and actually ask. Because I know with other people, like with you, we ask. I'm like, hey, we have free week coming up. Can we come over and visit? And it's not as often as I'd like, but
most of my social life comes to me now because it's so hard for me to get out to it. And I'm actually, as I think you would probably know, a more mellow person when I'm in my own social space. So I think I'm actually a nicer person to talk to when I'm at home. Because when I'm out, I'm stressed out usually by the environment and by the pain. And so my ability to interact with people narrows even at the time when I need it the most.
And I wanted to go back and talk about body image and relating to food, because I was talking to Reagan Chastain of Dances with Fat, and I love her blog, and we were talking about how how one eats is in our society a moral either failing or a moral issue. And I think disability also falls in that, people, like we were talking about before, people saying that it's your fault that you're disabled, or...
Well, and people assume that I'm disabled because I'm fat, not the other way around, which is kind of funny. I had a doctor even who tried to put me on a diet. He was saying, you have to lose weight because of, the stress it's putting on your knees for the arthritis or whatever. And I said, okay, look at my medicine list and tell me how many of those have severe weight gain as a side effect. And he's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, which medicine you want to take me off?
Right.
Because that's the only way. People are often shocked at how little I eat. And it's a running housemate thing to try to remind me to eat because I forget. So the assumption is that there's gluttony if you're fat. Right. And that gluttony is back to the almost, the Christian sort of antibody stuff of a particular era. And that are left over to us, that sex is bad and gluttony, which includes really gluttony is about enjoying food for its own sake rather than just eating to survive.
Right.
I mean, it's literally, if you think about what it means, it's not even about how much, but if you're seen eating a piece of chocolate cake and looking like you enjoy it, that's being gluttonous.
Well, even the food itself is, you have this decadent chocolate cake, and people are like, oh, that's so sinful. And
it's like because it's sex and food are both very connected here, which is the idea that, at least in most pagan ideologies that I know, are that enjoyment, pleasure, sensuality for its own sake is considered sacred rather than profane.
Right.
And then some religions have kind of the opposite, the word is not coming to me, but this idea that you have to, the way to be spiritual is to not enjoy your body, to be
asceticism.
The asceticism that says that you should, not want anything that brings that kind of sensual pleasure, that spiritual. And I think people are often unconscious of how much they're bringing that into their ideologies, even when they switch to a more modern or version of Christianity or a other religion. I wrote a piece for IPAN's journal years ago on food and how, for me, the fact that we almost universally share food as part of our spiritual practices, both in paganism and in other religions, is about looking at that and recognizing food is a sacred thing. It's this part of that cycle of life that some things die, including plants, even if you're a vegetarian, right? That we may eat. And that someday we will die and feed something else. Right. That's the way it works. And to recognize that one of the part of living is to be able to enjoy eating, enjoy sex, enjoy what movement, whatever we can do with it.
Right.
So I see that as part of recognizing that. And I love the blessing of handing somebody food and saying, may you never hunger, may you never thirst. This idea that you will have your needs met.
I love that one too. And, part of some of the deities that I work with, feeding people and making sure that needs are met is super important. Like I love Mabon. Mabon's my favorite holiday. Yeah. And it's like, we always have a big potluck kind of meal.
The feast, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm wondering maybe if that is kind of a mindset we need to readopt. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things Alon jokes about, it's not a religion, it's a meal plan, because every pagan event has potlucks. Well, not all of them, but most of them, because the idea that everybody, we used to call our group the Stone Soup Circle, not because we had soup for that meal, but because the idea that everybody would bring something both in the way of food, but also in intellectual ideas for the discussion that we would have. I see that as very much part of a connected culture versus a disconnected culture. So So it's true in almost every indigenous group ever studied that food is symbolic of sharing more than just the food.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, we even adopted that for our coven too. It's just, it does make, at least to me, it makes us feel closer because we're feeding each other. Plus we're talking with each other about the stuff that we're interested in. And, you know, and it makes us, it brings cohesion.
Yeah. Which is why also it's important to check for food allergies because if the person feels they can't eat with you because you haven't provided for their needs, that's sending the opposite message than you intended. So having something that's some gluten-free items amongst the food, or in my case, for instance, I can't eat pepper, just even having the foods labeled, you know, write up the ingredients that you put into the food and put a little card next to it when you bring it. That's something we used to try to get people to do. That way the person doesn't have to ask everybody who made this and what's in it. And if you bought it, bring the thing off the side. That's important to make people feel that you've thought about them and cared about whether they could eat or not.
And I know when I ask people, like if I'm inviting them to my house and I say, well, you know, what food allergies do you need something gluten-free or whatever? And it's like, oh, thank you for asking. That was really great. And, you know, and it's always, it's interesting because when I introduced having no alcohol for the Eucharist, but also always a gluten-free host, and, you know, I can't count now just how many people are like, oh, thank God that you've done that.
Yeah. Well, it feels wonderful to be included. It feels, you know, you feel like you're really connecting with people if they understand your limits. And I think that's really one of the things that may be hard for people. It's a very American thing to not want to believe in limits.
Right.
But we are by nature finite beings with specific needs and things we can and can't do. And that's true of everybody, no matter what they're, you know, whether they consider themselves or disabled, you know. I think of it in terms of, well, I can't sing very well, but I enjoy singing along with the group. But, you know, somebody else might have the talent of being able to at least lead us so that we can stay sort of into, or sing or solo, and who can play the drum and who can dance. And these are all, I think of them as not one person being, no one person should have to have all talents or all abilities. And if we keep that in mind, we can look at, oh, cool, they have this limit here, but they can do this thing here. Like I remember one doing rituals where I was literally asked to be the grounding person because I couldn't dance. Right. So there's ways to accommodate people's disabilities as just another characteristic rather than as something that separates them from people.
Well, it's thinking about what, you know, people can do and, you know, how can you include them to the best of their ability instead of thinking, oh, well, she can't do that, so we can't have her do X, Y, Z. Yeah.
I was talking recently about management styles, and the corporate level is to write this list of what you want the person to be, and then find a person to fit it. And the activist point of view that I was raised with is that any new person comes in the group, you find out what their skills are, and then you put them to work doing what they like doing and are good at. Right. And so it's the job becomes tailored to the person rather than finding the person for the job. And that's very much true in our lives with people. You know, what can this person bring to my life or my group, if you're doing a group, instead of saying what can't they bring, looking at their positives, what are their abilities, and recognizing the limits are part of that, not separate from it.
Or even seeing what abilities that, you know, they haven't recognized themselves.
Yeah.
That I think is the funnest.
I'll ask people, so what do you do for fun? As a job thing, in a sense, because you find out what people often are very good at whatever they do for fun because they find fun in doing something well. Right. So if you find out what their hobbies are, you will often find out where their real talents are. And that's true in pagan groups. So, you know, who's really good at writing the ritual versus who's good at actually speaking it are not always the same thing. You know, the people who can stand up and speak and bring power into the ritual might be terrible at writing the script in the first place, or vice versa.
Or you might have somebody that, you know, wants to just be the person that sets up or just helps, you know, making sure that everybody has what they need during the ritual. And yeah, it seems to me more common sense to be like, you know, let's find what you're good at and help you do it.
Yeah, and what you want to do. Yeah. Sometimes people are good. I mean, I do jobs I'm not necessarily good at, but I get joy at doing them well anyway, like the bookkeeping aspects. I've been treasurer for some organizations. Right. Couldn't say that was actually fun, but it was fun having a skill that helped everybody else do what they want to do. My mom was like that. She would find the least favorite jobs in an organization that still needed to be there for the organization to exist, like record keeping and the newsletter, you know, things like that.
I've done that too.
She did the newsletter. I would do the actual, you know, layout and design and writing. She would do the mailing list. Because if you don't have somebody really good, especially before computers, at keeping track of who's a member and who isn't, you wouldn't be able to reach your people. Right. And I guess that's true still with you know, now it would be monitoring the email list and things like that, moderating. Yeah,
I got kind of pulled into that myself, you know, with one of the organizations that the organization that ordained me, actually, the Christian organization that ordained me. I ended up doing their website, and that just kind of like how that happened. But
and you found something new that you like doing.
Yeah, which was really cool. And I was like, oh, great, it's something I could do from home. This is great.
It's also, this is part of a philosophy of mine, which I started with body image on. It's kind of funny. And that is that one of the things I had to work with, it didn't come naturally. I think our social structure teaches people to judge everybody. Right. And there's a difference between judge and learn. So instead of looking at somebody and say, are they beautiful? Do they meet the standard of beauty? I look at a person and say, what do I find beautiful in them? Right. I can almost always even compliment strangers in ways that make them feel good. I'll notice they're wearing something that maybe doesn't quite fit the rest of the outfit, which usually means that's something really important to them. Isn't that funny? Because they're wearing a piece of jewelry that wasn't got for the effect on the whole outfit, but was something that meant to them, and ask them about it, and they'll suddenly get all light up because that was something special to them. So it's a different way of looking at people, not trying to evaluate them by this non-existent standard of normal, but finding out, you know, where do they fit in the larger mosaic of
where they fit as a human being.
Yeah. And we're all evaluating people every day, whether or not they'll fit within our own lives or our groups. You know, and in some cases, it's not whether or not they fit already, but how can we find room for them in our group? And that's a different way of looking at it than, are they good enough already?
Yeah. I mean, somebody, you know, no matter how different somebody is, if you can hear them and talk to them and listen to them and find out what is it about them that makes them interesting and makes them them. You know, there's actually that, you know, we found this out at Pagan. I don't know if you remember Bubbles. He's this older gentleman, and he always wears this brightly colored tunic-like thing, and he blows bubbles, and he has a big ring in his nose, and he's really sweet, but a lot of people don't pay attention to him. And he spent a lot of time in our suite because he felt comfortable there, and we started talking to him, and we find out he's an engineer.
Yeah, but you wouldn't guess by looking at him, yeah.
But, you know, if we hadn't welcomed him in and said, hey, how you doing, and talked to him, well, we wouldn't have done that.
I think you've heard the story before, that my life was saved by somebody the rest of the group wanted me to kick out of the group. We ran the local Pagan discussion group potluck thing in Iowa, and this young woman showed up who, there's always one in every group who's just really disruptive, doesn't seem to be able to have conversations that there's flow. She'll take over and talk too much and about the wrong things and doesn't seem to get topic. And and, you know, now I can look at it and realize it's probably, you know, on the spectrum issue. But everybody didn't want her in the group. So I said, instead of kicking her out of the group, 'cause it's the only pagan group in town, guys, how can I help her learn to talk with the group and understand what's going on? So I would sit with her individually and teach her things like, if you're having a bad day where you don't think you're going to be able to pay attention to other people and accommodate that, that's the time to stay home. You can call me and chat with me individually so you don't get left out of talking. Right. But you don't have to necessarily attend the group then. But also don't leave her socially isolated, because they'll say, we can have a chat. You can come over and visit me on your own one-on-one when you're not. And all of that kind of thing. She ended up becoming very critical in the group. And when I was attacked at one point, she stepped in front of the car. So it's a long story, but she's the one who stepped in front of the car when I was being dragged by a car and stopped it. And then the rest of the group circled the car. But so I got disabled partially because of that car, but I also had my life saved because I didn't kick out somebody who was difficult to accommodate.
Right.
And I've thought about that over the years a lot, which is okay. This person's difficult and pushing my buttons. What can I do differently about my interaction with them, rather than trying to make them go away?
Yeah, and I also think, what is it about what buttons are being pushed in me about somebody, about how they're acting or how they look or, whatever. What are those buttons being pushed in me? And is it really them doing it, or is it my own reaction to them?
Yeah. Being self-aware is one of the hardest things I think about paganism. It's one of on my list of axioms, truisms, is, make conscious the unconscious. Because it's that unconscious stuff that'll usually, bite us in the posterior there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know even for myself, yeah, sure, I've been through school and seminary and all that, but, there's still plenty of things that I need to work on and a lot of things that I really still have to think about in that way. Just what is it, if I'm doing a ritual and somebody's bothering, I'm feeling bothered by somebody, is it me? Is it them? Is it something in the ritual? Or, are we just, what is it?
And your picture of the ritual going in, can it shift with the people who come to it?
Right.
I mean, I'm often one of those people who sometimes push people's buttons because they want everybody to stand still. I can't stand still. I couldn't even before I was disabled.
Right.
My way of grounding isn't to sit still.
Right.
It's to rock. Whether I'm standing or sitting, I have to rock to be able to ground.
Right.
And if their image is everybody sits serenely still, they're going to be bothered by this. Right. And so thinking about how different people do the same task through different routes. So they think I'm being not grounding. I am grounding. It's just that I don't reach it the same way.
Right. I get that. And I've had to really see that, if the ritual suddenly morphs into something completely different, I have this perfectionism streak in me.
You got the script and they're not following it. Well, you know what? Very few. Well,
I forgot to say A.
Life does not always follow the script.
Right.
And some of the best rituals I've ever been in went off script.
Absolutely.
And I have to watch my OCD tendencies to want to have it all be perfect. But perfect is not always the same as great.
That's true.
Great is often messy.
Yeah. And, same here, some of the best stuff is just happens. Some of the best stuff that has happened both in the pagan community and my Christian community, it's just suddenly somebody pulled me along and, oh, wow, now I'm feeling really good.
And, one of the things about ritual is that we often touch buttons we weren't expecting, or even knew they were there, either on ourselves or others. And I think one of the things about being a priest of any form of clergy is being able to recognize that it's not a bad thing when you hit somebody's button. It's a bad thing if you're hurting them, but it's not a bad thing if it comes up and you are able to address it and help them with it.
Right.
So, I was in a ritual years ago which took me into trance, which was fine, but what they didn't expect is that I started weeping and weeping, and they almost stopped the rituals. No, you actually hit something good that I needed to address, but I couldn't do it without a spontaneous emotional display.
Right.
So you'll have to often do aftercare, like you almost would with a scene in this sense, to people who've been in ritual, especially often this time of year at Samhain.
Right.
You're going to get grief coming up that people may. Grief is a scary emotion to most Americans.
Yeah,
they're terrified. We could all do a whole talk on just death, but they're really, and I think it's related to the disability thing. This idea that your body is mortal, that that not everything can be fixed,
right,
and that someday that will reach a point where it means the body stops completely, and that scares people in our culture, I think, more than just about anyone that's ever been studied, from what I see.
Oh yeah. And
so when grief comes up, that terrifies people. When my dad died, no one would talk to me at school. They were like terrified that death was catching or something, and mostly I think it's that because they hadn't experienced it, they did not know what the appropriate reaction to my states of mind were. Yeah. And so maybe that's a lot of part of clergy, is to find out what did they come to this group for, even if they didn't realize why. What needs are getting addressed, and some of those are often bringing up, hitting your buttons, processing it, finding your what was it that the therapy school used to call it, with growth edges. Right. Instead of calling it your broken place, call it a growth edge, something that may not ever go away, but at least teaches you about yourself.
And you can at least see it and recognize it, and sometimes give it a name, and be able to deal with it. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time.
It's been great to talk about this stuff.
It has been.
You can invite me back if you like.
Absolutely. We can talk about that.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Cheery. If people would like to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Well, I think you'll have my email on the site and my link to some of my books.
Yep. We will post that on the show notes.
All right.
Thanks, Dany.
All right. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dany for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. There you can also subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, join our forums, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.